Okay, so in this video, we're going to begin kind of the basics of bioenergetics. So before we even get started in this, I encourage you begin to read in chapter 3. As I mentioned, kind of the first day of class, this section of the class is probably one of the most difficult sections, simply because a lot of the terms here may be unfamiliar to you. A lot of this is a little more chemistry, a little more biochemistry, which some of you may love, but my guess is the majority of you are at least not familiar with. And so I'm going to try to make this as basic as possible. There are some places I'm going to go to really in-depthly. That'll kind of be in the next lectures. Today, what I want to do is just kind of give us the basics of two key things. One, enzymes and the role of enzymes in bioenergetics, because we're going to talk a lot about enzymes. And then basically the second part, the kind of different reactions that are going to occur. As we go on in this chapter, we're going to go very in depth into glycolysis, Krebs cycle, formation of ATP, things like that. And so this is kind of the building blocks for beginning to do that. Okay, so let's kind of just begin with some basic terms. A lot of this chapter we're going to talk about is metabolism, this idea of metabolism. Now, my guess is when you hear the word metabolism, you probably think of food you eat and what you do with it, or you have a high metabolism, so maybe you're skinny, or you have a slow metabolism and maybe you're not. Maybe that's how you think of metabolism. Really, a better, more chemistry-driven idea of metabolism is this idea that there are chemical reactions that occur in the body to break down and synthesize various different molecules. And so there is a lot that is involved in this. We generally say that there's two types of reactions. There's anabolic and catabolic. Anabolic you've probably heard of with the term anabolic steroids. Now we're going to talk about those way later in the semester. But anabolic by definition is something that will bring together synthesized molecules. And so not surprisingly, anabolic steroids are steroids that have a role in protein synthesis. Now, little hint, there's actually a lot of steroids that are not anabolic. The vast majority are not. We'll get to that later on. And so there's anabolic. And then there's also catabolic reactions. These are reactions that are going to break down molecules. And both of these are necessary. Don't just think anabolic is good, catabolic is bad. In fact, one of the most important catabolic reactions is the breakdown of glucose to form ATP. It is the reason you're alive as we speak. And so catabolic reactions, don't think of those as bad, think of those as necessary to go along with anabolic reactions. Now, for this chapter, we're going to focus a lot on energy and how our body uses foods we eat, whatever those foods are, to form energy. And so a lot of our, at least in this chapter, focus on metabolism is a little bit more catabolic. How do we take those macronutrients and break them down? Now, having said that, we're going to talk about anabolic reactions as we go forward. When we talk about skeletal muscle and bone, and even the endocrine system to an extent, we will talk about some of these more anabolic reactions. Okay, so this kind of gives a picture of this. And again, I wouldn't focus so much on memorizing this as just grasping what's going on here. Is that there are catabolic reactions, and a very common one is breaking down macronutrients, carbohydrates, fats, proteins, the things you eat, into byproducts. Now, really, the key is energy, because from the food we eat, we need energy for our cells to do whatever it is they need to do. But there are byproducts of those reactions. And we're going to talk about these later on. The carbon dioxide, which is CO2, water, the most common one, H2O, ammonium, NH3, and many other byproducts of these. And hint, by the way, these byproducts are really helpful to us. When it comes to actual measurement of things, a lot of times we're not able to directly measure, for example, energy. It's very hard to directly measure how much energy you use. We can't put a sensor in every cell and come up with a number. However, what we can do is measure byproducts. And so very common in the lab, very common in physiology, a lot of the things we measure and test is often byproducts, not necessarily specific reactions. And then there's also anabolic, and let me kind of move this up here for a second. I'm up there. Anabolic, here we have precursors, oftentimes, again, macronutrients, amino acids, proteins, sugars, carbohydrates, fatty acids, and taking these together to form maybe larger proteins, maybe larger polysaccharides. This is what we see when we are forming larger proteins, say in muscle or in bone. Or maybe we are taking glucose we've eaten, sugars, and forming glycogen, larger polysaccharides. It could also be, as much as we may not like this, taking foods and forming them into lipids, which we store as adipose tissue or fat. And again, all of these are essential processes, all of these, for utilization of energy later on, for building up cells, for various structures in the body. And so we're going to look a lot at these catabolic and anabolic reactions. And with that, there's also sort of a second way we could classify these as far as what these reactions produce. There are some reactions that are going to require energy. We call these endergonic. Right? And as we'll see in our next lectures as far as glycolysis, to form ATP actually requires energy. In other words, to get energy, you need energy, which makes you think for a little bit. We'll talk about that. So there are endergonic reactions. There are also exergonic reactions. These are reactions that release energy. Now, whenever you utilize energy, you release heat, which many of us experience. When we exercise, we get overheated or we at least increase by temperature. We start to sweat. We are experiencing exergonic reactions. And typically, we are going to see both of these reactions, especially in bioenergetics. Forming ATP, very key, but also utilizing and breaking down that ATP is very exergonic. And so both of these are really key to metabolism and to bioenergetics. And here's a classic example. One of the key processes we're going to talk about in this class is glycolysis. So learn that term. You're going to hear it a lot. Go on Canvas. There's other videos that get really in depth in the steps of glycolysis. But basically glycolysis in a very broad sense, because we're going to talk about it very specifically later on, is taking glucose and oxygen and through various enzyme-driven reactions, releasing energy, forming ATP, so our cells can do what we want to do. We would call this an exergonic reaction. Now, what you don't see on the screen is actually to get this process started, you actually need energy. And so, although this is exergonic, it actually is also technically endergonic as well. Another key thing in these reactions, in these steps, is the key role of enzymes. And so let me just kind of briefly talk about enzymes right now, because we're going to talk a lot about them, especially in metabolism. Enzymes are going to be key proteins, always proteins, that are going to catalyze reactions, any reaction. In other words, cause a reaction to either A, occur, or B, occur faster. All right. And enzymes, basically how they're going to function is take some substrate, something, and alter it, alter a bond, a chemical bond. You have isomerases, which are enzymes which just kind of alter where bonds are in a compound. You may have some enzymes which actually break apart or cleave parts of it. We see this with lipases and other enzymes like sucrase, lactase in the small intestine, that are going to have some effect on a compound, a molecule. Right? Enzymes control literally every reaction in the body. And they are unbelievably important. In fact, they're so important. My guess, in fact, I'm certain, each of you has had blood work done that has looked to measure certain enzymes. If you went to a doctor, they want to draw some blood and measure some things. They looked at some enzymes, some common ones, creatine kinase, which is key in muscle and muscle breakdown. Alkaline phosphatase, which has a role in bone, also has a role in metabolism. Lactate dehydrogenase has a role with lactate. We'll talk about that later on. Amylase and lactase, if you've had me for nutrition, you remember those from the amylases in the saliva. It's also in the small intestine. Lactase breaks down lactose. There are proteases. There are thousands upon thousands of different enzymes which are going to play key roles in metabolism. And this is really important because in glycolysis and in the Krebs cycle, there are few key enzymes that are going to make you memorize because they're really, really important. Some of these we'll talk about later on, but just kind of understand that. One last thing I want you to grasp as we finish this is that enzymes are real finicky. And so I'm just going to hopefully not offend anyone. When I think of enzymes, I think of cats. If you're a cat person, don't take this personally. Nothing against cats. I am a dog person. It's okay if you love cats. Cats serve a purpose, from what I understand. And so enzymes, one of the key things about enzymes is they require a very, very narrow range of pH. We'll talk about more pH later on, to function. And if pH is altered in any way, if the blood becomes too acidic or too alkalytic, enzymes start to really not work. They get very, what I would say, finicky. Now, that's not a very chemistry word, but go with it. And so this is key because enzymes require a very, very specific pH. Now, one of the things we'll see is that one of the things your body makes a huge effort to keep normal is pH. Well, why? Enzymes. If pH stays normal, enzymes function. When pH doesn't stay normal, when pH starts to drop in acidosis, which by the way happens when you exercise, enzymes start to fall apart. They start to not function. And if enzymes start to not function, key processes begin to not occur, like glycolysis, which is kind of a deal if you want to do stuff. And so we're going to talk a lot. You will hear me talk tons about enzymes and pH because they do play a key role, especially in bioenergetics and metabolism. Okay, next lecture we're going to talk about ATP, adenosine triphosphate. Awesome, very, very important. That'll be the focus of our next lecture online.